Page 376. Like most people of the Americas in the early 1800s, the Seminole in this village lived off the land they farmed. Analyzing key ideas and details. Number 1. Analyzing. What sentence in this section expresses Osceola's feeling about white settlers and the U.S. government? Number 2. Determining central ideas. Explain the main idea of the text under the heading, The Seminole Wars. This statue, Osceola, is located in Tallahassee, Florida. Resistance and removal. Guiding question. Why did some Native Americans resist resettlement? Many Native American peoples did not want to give up their lands. However, the Seminole in Florida were the only group to successfully resist removal. They faced pressure in the early 1830s to sign treaties giving up their land, but the Seminole leader, Osceola, and his followers refused to leave. They decided to fight instead. Osceola was born a Creek but lived among the Seminole of Florida. I will make the white man red with blood, and then blacken him in the sun and rain, Osceola vowed. The Seminole Wars. In 1835, the U.S. Army arrived in Florida to force the removal of the Seminole. Instead, in December 1835, a group of Seminole attacked troops led by Major Francis Dade as they marched across central Florida. Only a few soldiers survived. The Dade massacre prompted a call for additional troops to fight the Seminole. Between 1835 and 1842, about 3,000 Seminole and African Americans known as Black Seminoles fought some 30,000 U.S. soldiers. The Black Seminoles had escaped from Georgia and South Carolina slaveholders. Some lived among the Seminole people. Others had built their own settlements. Like the Seminole, they did not want to move. One reason is that they feared the American soldiers would force them back into slavery. Together, the Seminole and Black Seminoles attacked white settlements along the Florida coast. They made surprise attacks and then retreated back into the forests and swamps. The war cost the U.S. government over $20 million and the lives of more than 1,500 soldiers. Many Seminole also died. Others were captured and forced to move west. In 1842, with most of the surviving Seminole now in Indian Territory, the fighting stopped. War broke out again in 1855 over what little land in Florida the Seminole had left. By 1858, the few remaining Seminole had escaped into the Everglades, where their descendants still live today. Biography. Osceola, 1804 to 1838. Osceola, whose birth name was Billy Powell, had Creek, Scots-Irish, and English heritage. His mother was Creek, and she raised him in a Creek community in what is today Alabama. After the defeat of Creek forces in the War of 1812, he fled with other Creek refugees to Florida. The Seminole incorporated many free or escaped African Americans into their community, and Osceola married an African American woman. He fought fiercely against the U.S. government and white settlers in Florida until his death. Osceola was arrested as he carried a white flag of truce on his way to peace talks at Fort Peyton, and he died 3 months later in prison. In the Indian Territory, the Cherokee and other groups built new log cabins similar to the one shown here. Life in the West. By 1842, only a few scattered groups of Native Americans remained east of the Mississippi River. Most of them now lived in the West. They had given up more than 100 million acres of land. In return, they received about $68 million and 32 million acres west of the Mississippi. There they lived, organized by tribes, on reservations. Eventually, white settlement would extend into these areas as well. The 5 civilized tribes relocated in the eastern half of Indian Territory on lands already claimed by several Plains peoples, including the Osage, Comanche, and Kiowa. The U.S. Army built a number of forts in the area and promised to protect the 5 civilized tribes and keep peace in the area. The Choctaw Police Force, known as the Light Horsemen, also helped maintain order and public safety. Page 378. Citizenship. Process, rules, and laws. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution defines the government's right of eminent domain, the power to take private property for public use. This power allows the government to purchase private property for a fair price, and the landowner is legally required to sell. This typically happens when a local or state government needs to build a road, bridge, or otherwise provide for public use and benefit. There has been a long history of protest and debate over the constitutionality of eminent domain practices. Many Native Americans and others have lost their lands under eminent domain laws because of the discovery of natural resources on the land. Recently, the Dakota Access Pipeline caused controversy because it was planned to cross land near Sioux sites of religious significance. Native Americans as well as farmers filed lawsuits to stop eminent domain rights to their lands. Settled in their new homes, the 5 civilized tribes developed their own constitutions and governments. They built farms and schools. However, the disputes over removal that arose within each tribal group during the 1830s continued to divide the groups for years to come. Checking for understanding. Number 1. Describing how did the Seminole, with only 3,000 people, successfully defend themselves against 30,000 U.S. troops. Number 2. Explaining issues. When members of the 5 civilized tribes arrived in Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River, they faced new problems. What situation created tensions for new arrivals in Indian Territory? Lesson 2. Review and activities. Number 1. Time and place. Number 1. Describing. After they were forced from their homelands, where did most of the Native American peoples of the Southeast United States go? Building history, social science, analysis skills. Number 2. Explaining issues. How did the U.S. government justify the forced relocation of Native Americans? Number 3. Analyzing. Why were the Cherokee forced to move in spite of the Supreme Court's ruling in Worcester v. Georgia? Number 4. Describing. How did the Seminole resist removal? Number 5. Writing about history. Number 5. Narrative writing. Write a newspaper article describing the forced relocation of the Cherokee to Oklahoma. Be sure to include a headline. Collaborating. Number 6. Presenting. Work with another student to research the current status of a Native American nation discussed in this lesson. Create a short presentation on your findings to share with your class.